Well, good morning, all. Hopefully you can hear me all right. We are delighted to come together this morning as we continue in our Advent series today. Um, got everything going on at home and trying to stay warm on a rainy, cold day. It's somewhat ironic that this is the day, talk about water, this is the day when we remember John the Baptist in the water, inviting everybody to kind of move through the water into new territory, a new landscape. And in some ways, it serves as a metaphor for this morning, as today we're going to think a little bit about the ways in which we imagine, or maybe it's reimagine the way in which Christmas holds us. So oftentimes we think about Christmas in its cultural context, everything that makes up the Christmas holidays and all that we've created around that as a culture that is oftentimes so driven by procurement of goods, Amazon trucks, stuff like wreaths and evergreens and Christmas trees and presents and meals and music. That's sort of the energy of Christmas that so many of us have gotten used to and have come to love and cherish. But is that really what the story of Jesus' birth is all about, as it's articulated, particularly in Matthew and Luke's gospel? And so today I'm delighted to have an interview with Lee Van Ham, who's written a book that tries to help us, acknowledge that Christmas time is that time of year that we all want to dive into and reconnect with everything that brings us warmth and joy. But also there's a spirit to Christmas that's sometimes gets lost, that's inside of the story of Jesus' actual birth and how important and valuable that is. So I'm going to invite Lee to join us this morning to kind of have a conversation about that. So as we get rolling, obviously, make sure you shout out to each other and say hello this morning. This wonderful way to kind of be together as we ramp up for Christmas morn and all of the excitement that comes around Christmas, despite how we'll be navigating this given the coronavirus as well. So shout out to each other, make sure you connect to each other this morning. The other thing that I think, these are exciting times. We've just got a vaccine, so there's joy in the air, around that. I know I feel a little bit of a weight lifted from my own shoulders because that is now something that's going to be a part of our future together. Monday, of course, the Electoral College gathers together, and despite all the mayhem around this election, we move closer and closer to the confidence of where we're going to move together as a country, despite all of the intense polarization and challenges we face. Clearly, that is going to be something that all of us are looking forward to, I'm sure, Monday, and then, of course, on January 6th, when the final decision is made about who will be our next president. So that too is on the horizon. Good news there as well. I have to admit too, I think the other day I was listening to a person who's celebrating Hanukkah talk about the way in which they were kind of reimagining Hanukkah given the context in which we find ourselves. And it reminded me that we're all sort of facing that challenge, right? We move into these holidays with all of the symbolism and the energy and the spiritual connection and the relational connections, and we bring alongside of that all that's going on in our cultural context. And clearly there is a lot on our plate, so much on our plate that I think many of us are sometimes find ourselves on the brink of snapping. The other day I was in a meeting and I could tell my stress level is just right underneath the surface. And so we're all living like that. And I was listening to him trying to explain how to fold in some of the themes of our cultural situation into the Hanukkah celebration, right? The eight miraculous days where the menorah remains lit, even though it doesn't have enough fuel to keep it burning. It's just a great story, and how we too long for the story of Jesus' birth and Christmas to work alongside of our cultural context. And one of the reasons I'm delighted to have Lee Van Ham with us today is because I think he brings a perspective to the birth narratives that I hope you see as well, that invites us to see how it addresses the cultural challenges and the global challenges, even the environmental challenges, economic challenges, racial justice challenges, issues around polarity that we all face. Are there some guiding principles within the birth narratives that maybe sometimes get lost in our Christmas celebrations that can help us move forward? So that's what we're going to explore today. I'm glad you're along for the ride. In a moment, I'm going to invite Lee to join us in this conversation. And I keep dropping my notes and kind of have an interview with him today. So I'll introduce you to him and have that conversation with Lee. And then after the conversation, we'll let Lee go. I'll maybe reflect on some of his comments and then invite you to think more fully about what he is proposing as we move together into the Christmas holidays and think about the ways in which we might integrate the birth of Jesus and the stories of Jesus' birth into our Christmas celebrations. So let me invite Lee into our conversation today. Hello, Lee.
Hello, Dan.
It's so good to have you this morning. I was thinking, I've known you only through your lovely daughter, and it's delightful to finally meet you for the first time.
Same here. Very delighted.
Yeah, it's funny that our paths would cross because, obviously Lauren has been a big part of a lot of our earth-based festivals that we've done, and we've used her so many times. And then one of those moments, she just dropped a hint as to what you've been up to for, a bulk of your career. And I thought, oh my goodness, no wonder you are the way you are. You have not fallen too far from the tree, that's for sure.
Well, and she's taken me quite a ways beyond where I was before she came along. So
that's awesome. Our kids often do that for us, don't they?
They sure do, and
yes.
it's quite wonderful.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, we're delighted to have you today. As I just explained to folks, I'm hoping that both the combination of this conversation that we have this morning, and then, of course, we're going to have a podcast together coming up that gets released on December 25th, kind of helping them expand or dive deeper into the way in which they think about this holiday, that it's become so invested with all the cultural energy and the accoutrements that we gather around the holiday, like me right now, right? I got my fireplace.
It's beautiful, Dan.
Yeah, it is beautiful. At the same time, there is, some challenging depth that we all are confronted with as we really think about the narratives as we find them, particularly in Matthew and Luke's gospel. And so I want to jump into it today and get you to kind of talk us through some of the approaches that you took as you wrote the book that we've made reference to on our Facebook feed, to kind of think about the way in which the narratives in Matthew and Luke that talk about the birth of Jesus might actually be, in some ways, a counter narrative to the kind of the Christmas paradigm in which we find ourselves. And one of the things that you talk about in your book is this kind of capacity to sort of de-link the Christmas holiday energy from the actual birth narrative and to kind of give some space between them. And I guess my first question to you is, why do you find that to be an important thing to begin to do? Sure. And maybe some of the reasons why.
Sure. Well, one thing is simply to be aware of the history. The birth stories happened, came on the scene about 85, more or less, Common Era, or AD, as we often say. And then no Christmas. The word Christmas or Christ Mass didn't happen until the 4th century, hundreds of years later. Now, one can say, okay, well, that's just sort of a sequence, an evolutionary thing. But delinking is very important in a word because the birth story has far more power than what today is the Christmas story. The Christmas story isn't today really about the birth of Jesus. I mean, it might be someone might say that's at the root of it, but that root is so deep, it's completely covered or it's more like a spring that's covered in debris. But an example of the importance of delinking.
Yeah.
If we take the American dream, it's quite a powerful story. And we hear about the land of opportunity. It's a story that really works for some people. And it's a story that doesn't work at all for lots of people, because there's a lot more to this country than what is captured in the American dream. And the American dream is a rather late addition to the story of this country, as people arrived and had not really a kind relationship with, in most cases, with the people who are already here. So now, so what we get then is the Black Lives Matter saying, hey, just a minute, the story doesn't really work for me. This isn't a dream of any kind that I want to remember. This is the nightmare I don't want anymore. So by delinking the American dream from the reality and saying, oh, you have a different story, Black Lives Matter, which isn't captured in the American dream. So in the same way, the birth story of Jesus, written in 85, as Matthew and Luke looked at what was happening in these little contrast societies that were called ecclesias, or churches, people called out of empire. He saw a very different reality than what was happening in the imperial environment, or the empire's story. So the delinking is essential to get at the power of transformation that we need in our world today, with the climate crises or the climate emergency we're in, and that's accelerating for us. So we need to uncover this transformative power.
Yeah, and Lee, do you think that just giving people permission to delink, like you made the example with Black Lives Matter versus the American dream, right? So it allows me to see, oh yeah, I see the American dream more clearly for what it is. And I see the issues of Black Lives Matter maybe for the first time, because I thought that American dream covered the whole picture, right?
Precisely.
And so that's what I'm hearing you say about these birth stories, is that,
precisely,
look, you're in a Christmas narrative right now. I'm living in it completely.
Right.
And at the same time, if I delink them, I value that for what it has become.
Yes.
But I'm also able to look more fully and richly at the birth narrative for what it really is in its own context.
Yes, and they're very, very different stories when we really delink them. And it isn't that they might not touch each other here and there.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
But essentially the stories are not the same, and it's very liberating.
Well,
it's
very
freeing.
Yeah, I get it. So talk about that for a minute. Because so if you were to say, if you were to paint a picture for folks, what is the worldview in your estimation? What's the worldview that Christmas has come to create, reinforce, guide us into? And is there a different worldview, or you sense something else brewing in the Jesus narratives? Are there two different trajectories in those worldviews that are trying to be created in those contexts that kind of motivate us even more to think about, maybe I should be delinking these two because they don't support the same kind of worldviews? What's your sense of that?
Yeah, let me see. This is obviously a big question, but
sorry about that.
It's all right. Yeah, I started working with worldviews quite explicitly about 10 years ago, just noticing that views of the world really differ. And when a view of the world differs, people start having different ideas about economics. They have different ideas about social class. Different ideas about nature and creation, different ideas about religion. So the view of the world, or the worldview, is so important. Well, to get right to your question, the Christmas story was born in the world of superpower, we call it today. Empire, we called, was more the language of the time, the Roman Empire in particular.
Yeah.
So there's an imperial worldview there of domination, accumulation, centralized power, and maintain power through the state and through whatever means of consolidation economically and militarily in all these ways. Now, the contrast to that is the Earth view. The way, I mean, the Earth doesn't look at the superpower, if we can personify Earth in this way.
Yeah.
The Earth doesn't look at superpower and say, wow, that's what I want to do. The Earth looks at superpower and say, wow, that's really a painful, that really hurts me. This is really bad for me. And so, well, I began to, when I thought about naming these two worldviews before, and many names work, but I was using the two names of multi-Earth because I realized that the superpower worldview requires more than one planet to resource it. And then I talked about the one Earth worldview because I saw, oh my goodness, look at all of the rich interdependence of living on only one planet in a highly democratized way that nature functions. And we don't destroy the planet, and we don't have to get violent with each other about getting our share of the oil or whatever. So they're two very different worldviews, and Christmas was born in the imperial worldview. Today, the superpower worldview, and the superpower loves to continue to co-opt, claim Christmas, and maybe throw in a touch of Jesus, but primarily, it's primarily, especially for businesses, a highly commercialized activity and highly economic activity. Some businesses get over 60% of their income for the year in this month. In contrast to that, there's the earth-based way of the people around the birth of Jesus were much closer to the earth, and they were all feeling the pain of the empire along with the planet. Two worldviews.
Yeah, I did like the way in which you tried to help us understand that, and it's not that it's not like I'm going to haul everything out of the house and change my rituals, although we want to get to that at the end, but to see more clearly what the patterns of behavior that circulate around Christmas time, what they're reinforcing, and where, like what you just described, where do they derive their almost like their trajectory or momentum or capacity out from a Roman imperialistic system. I love that. But then at the same time, you're saying the alternative worldview, the one world view, which is, I never thought about it that way, multi-world versus one world. So thank you for that. That's a new one for me. The one world view is actually embedded in the birth narratives themselves. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about one of the ways in which you in your book kind of explore the alternative story that the birth narratives are telling is in the genealogy. And you folded into that genealogy story a number of women and their roles. And I think it's just a curious handle, not curious, it's like a significant handle of how to get an indication that maybe these birth stories are talking about a different worldview. Could you use one of those women's stories to kind of give folks an example, like a taste of what we might talk more fully about in the podcast, about how is that worldview being reinforced in this birth narrative that we've all come to love and enjoy around this time of year?
Yeah, this is fun to do. I also just indicate that there are charts contrasting one Earth and multi-Earth worldviews in my first two books, it was a great exercise for me to say, well, just how are these two worldviews really different? And it includes a section on how different they are for religions. Yeah, so about the women in this gene, and I mean, most people have looked at Matthew for the Christmas story, and they say, well, I'll skip over these verses.
Right. This is boring.
I can't say these names, and why would I bother? So we've missed, by and large, something that Matthew is doing, writing again from the perspective of around 85 years after the birth of Jesus, more like probably 90 years. So he's looking at what's happened with women in these communities, and he sees what Paul said in Galatians. And by the way, all of Paul's letters and the epistles are all prior to the Gospels. So Matthew's writing after all of that.
Yeah.
So anyway, this phrase that Paul has in the Galatians, there is neither male nor female. And Matthew saw that very clearly, as did Luke, and he presents it in a different way. But so how does he talk about all that? He said, we've had the genealogy, the family tree of Jesus all wrong. We've only talked about the men. And that doesn't illustrate what I'm experiencing in these transformative communities. So he creates a different genealogy, highly selective, as genealogies tend to be when you're trying to go from Adam to
you got some wiggle room, plenty of time to play with.
So he includes 4 women, leading up to Mary, and every one of these women is involved in some form of scandal. Every one of these women is in her own powerful ways revolting against male domination. So Tamar, get right to Tamar. Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba are the other ones that are in this in this genealogy. But Tamar, the very first one, is married in the family of Judah. She's not a Jewess herself, which is also interesting. None of the 4 women in the genealogy are. So think about that in terms of your family tree, and in terms of immigration and such things. So here we have Tamar, and her husband dies. So what's supposed to happen at that time was that the next oldest son, she was married to the oldest son. The next oldest son is supposed to marry her. He revolts. He does not want to have any children that carry the name of his older brother, whom I guess he didn't like very much. And so it's very graphic. You can read it there. What is it? Genesis 37, I think. People can read the story there. That's way more interesting than what I'm describing it here. And then there's the third son, and Judah refuses to intervene when he doesn't want to marry Tamar either. Now, we say, well, that's kind of a funny rule in the first place, but let me say what a powerful and important rule that was at that time. For society to work, women who were not able to get into a marriage would never achieve what was perceived as the full personhood of womanhood in bearing a child. And secondly, if she was not connected economically to a male, she pretty much was destined for the streets. It was the Social Security and the safety net of that time. So just to say, move quickly then to wrap this part of it up. Tamar, since she was in effect being told by Judah and his family, go be a prostitute, she decided to do it. And so she dressed up in her own form of prostitution clothes, went out on a pathway that she knew Judah used, had covered her face, and seduced him, basically. Judah, this man who had refused to invoke the safety net for her, and she was very clever. Not only did they have intercourse together, but she took a piece of his clothing so that when he said, "No, I don't have anything to do with that child. That's just a lie. She's lying to us," she could hold up the piece of clothing and saying, "What's this, Judah?"
That's
And
great.
and so he ended up saying, "You were more honest and truthful than I." But the thing is, Tamar and all of these women use their erotic power.
Mm.
Now that's really important. Erotic, not just in the term of sexual, though it is definitely sexual in all four of these instances. But in patriarchal societies and masculine dominated societies, eros gets suppressed. And eros, the Greeks knew enough to say eros is really powerful, and they named one of the gods for her. So this is a very powerful and sacred power. And it's often the only one, the one that women can best use. And so Tamar did a lot to mess with patriarchy and basically say, men, carry out your responsibilities, do it. And she used eros to expose that they were not doing it. So that then leads up to Mary, and she too is a revolutionary woman who does things very differently. She and Joseph, however you understand that relationship and that marriage, but there's eros involved there too. And so it's an example of how genealogy is used by Matthew in 85, 90 years after the birth of Jesus to undercut male domination and saying,
Yeah.
look, in our churches, we have an equality.
I love that. I love that there's and maybe we don't see that because we probably skip over all of the stuff that you just talked about. But there is I don't want to call it a confrontation, but there is a capacity for unraveling the tentacles of these systems that oppress us, like male dominance, that is woven into this story of how salvation comes to us, right? The birthing of this Jesus character. And that is, in a sense, an invitation to think about what needs to be unraveled today, right? In all the complexities that we have,
Definitely.
and that how do you bring, I never thought about out from what kind of power capacity can you engage those, like Tamar and her ability to bring her, what capacity she did have to bring down that system of oppression. Probably few of us are thinking that's the heart of the Christmas story, but that's definitely a part of what's going on here. That's sort of why I love the book that you wrote, is that it just opens up these different angles about the birth of Jesus. I was going to ask you about the other question I was going to ask you this morning was about the kind of the method you bring to looking at these texts. But I think you've pretty much shared, you're putting them in context, both their own historical context, what's going on in the time, which helps you see what are the issues they're really addressing. It seems like that's one method that you're using.
Yes, it's very much about looking at saying, when's Matthew writing? Oh, that's 15 years after the destruction of Jerusalem and the Jewish identity. That's well beyond the establishment of these churches. Oh, what are they trying to say when they're going to talk about the life of Jesus, starting with his birth? So that really is key to the methodology, right?
Yeah. And what strikes me about that is that when and where matters, right? So you're bringing the when and where question to a narrative of old, but it just, for the people who are paying attention to this, the hint is when and where matters now, right? So just like you started off with the Black Lives Matter movement or the environmental crisis or polarization in America or economic inequality, the where and the when matters to what salvation really should be looking like in any time and place.
And white male domination, not just white, is still an issue that with that kind of issue never goes away, but because these are the powers of genders and how we work with all of that. So
Yeah.
it's terribly important to see that that is also at play in the birth story of Jesus, and that people are experiencing transformation amid those very dangerous and wonderful powers.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let me ask you one final questions, and I want to invite people, of course. I told Lee, when I talked to Lauren, Lee's daughter, she said, my dad can talk forever. So I'm like, oh, awesome.
You're right.
So sorry about that disclosure, but what it means is that I got so excited about that. I'm like, well, I want to have a further conversation with Lee. And the next conversation we're going to have that'll be in our podcast is Lee folds in a kind of a cosmic awareness to the stories. So you heard today about the role of women, but the whole cosmos plays a role in this story. And I can't wait to follow up. We're going to have that conversation next week. So I'm excited about that. But let me finish up with, so just your own personal practices. So as I indicated in my kind of questions to you, you know, I, like everybody else, love to sit down with my Manhattan and enjoy my fire and the jazz Christmas music and the whole energy of Christmas, right? I want to fall into that and be present for that because it's so warm and cozy.
Right.
And in some ways, your story functions as a, maybe it's like a stone in the shoe, or it's a little bit like when the Grinch stands looking over Whoville and saying, you know, what's going on down there? That's not right. You're shaking up some of the ways in which I view my experience of Christmas. Have you, now that you've done this work and tried to think about how you integrate the energy and the vibrancy of the birth narratives into Christmas time, has it actually changed some of the practices that you bring to the Christmas season for yourself, or that you would advocate for, so that maybe some edges of that can find its way back into this kind of vibe? What's your sense of that?
Just to let everyone listening know, I was a pastor for 32 years in three congregations, in different congregations in the Midwest, Chicago and Lincoln, Nebraska. And I struggled enormously with how I felt there were just layers in this season that I just couldn't get to. And I tried everything I could in times of worship, and some of those services were beautiful. I mean, and you get the candlelight and I mean and I think people in many cases did have you know, an experience of God's presence. Now then, to your point, I love everything that you like to do on Christmas. Well, I'm not too fond of Manhattans, but I have my own substitute. I have my own substitutes.
I suppose we all do, yeah.
But you know, Juanita, my wife, and I just put up our tree this week, and I have my eggnog with brandy or coffee or whatever I want it with, and I mean, I love these things, and I enjoy them, and I'd say, folks, keep enjoying them. I mean, you might want to check your commercialism a little bit if that messes with you, and some of those things that really go against values. Here's the thing, Dan. You know, the birth of Jesus was never really celebrated. I mean, we don't really know when his birthday was. And so I'm thinking, okay, and this year I'm thinking this especially. I mean, this stuff works with me every season. Okay, every time it comes around.
Sorry about that.
I'm ready to do more things again. Anyway, more things with these stories. I missed a lot in my book, but so I'm thinking, well, I don't have to celebrate the birth of Jesus in this. I'm celebrating the Christmas story, which is very strong and real. And yes, there are touches. I'm reminded of the birth of Jesus. So the birth of Jesus is really about transformations at a deeper level and a more comprehensive dimension and scale than what the Christmas story can touch. And really the birth story is a counter story, like you say. I would say let's not really try too hard to bring them together. I don't know where that leaves you in your worship, but we have we need a consciousness about it, I think, is what it amounts to, and enough consciousness about it so that we keep finding the power in the birth story that is strong enough to reverse the perils of our planet today.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah.
and the Christmas story can't do it. The Christmas story is caught up in adding to the perils of our planet. But the birth of Jesus is different. It's a creation-based kind of thing. And if your congregation has already done a good bit of work with creation-based understandings, that's where we really celebrate the birth of Jesus. And we don't have, like I said, it wasn't celebrated. We don't particularly have to celebrate it. We just have
Right.
to embody it and enact it
Yeah.
in how we go about our lives.
That's awesome. I love the way you closed on this thing. I would encourage people to listen to the podcast we have, because I think it'll allow Lee a little bit more time to kind of talk about, what is the transformative power in this narrative, particularly given our place in this interconnected cosmology in which we find ourselves, in which we've lived as if there's multi-worlds, right? We've lived this out in a way that's like jeopardizes our ability to continue. So we all know that. How does that story help us, guide us into some a deeper way of thinking about our place in the planet? So I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Me too. I love talking with you,
Me
Dan.
too. I was thinking, where do you live again? I'm going to come
conversation.
over for dinner.
That's a good idea.
Once this is over. Of course, I don't know how well you make a Manhattan, but we'll check out,
right.
how that goes.
Well, I would disappoint you on that one,
Okay,
but I can offer something else.
That's great. Well, Lee, I really appreciate you spending some time with us this morning in this kind of setting, and I know people are going to appreciate your thoughtfulness today. So,
well, you're very generous with the time as I look at it, and you've let me be more long-winded than I thought I would.
That's all right. It saved me from doing a lot of homework, so I appreciate it. All right, I'll let you log off, and then we will see you this week in our podcast interview. All right, Lee?
Peace be with you all.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. Well, what a delight it was to have Lee with us today. Let me look at the time to see how we're doing here. Oh, we're doing fine. I'd be curious if listening to what he has to say, especially as I get ready to have an interview with him this week, if you have like questions or insights or comments, or I wonder about this, if you write those in the chat today, I can fold those into my conversation with him. I have already given him an outline for that podcast, but we've got more wiggle room in that podcast because we can go for like a good solid 45 minutes of conversation. So I would love to hear what you're thinking about this. One of the things that I think he brought up that I think it's okay to tend to, which made me feel, I don't know what, it just brought a lightness to me, is that, hey, it's Christmas. Let's celebrate Christmas. Let's pay attention to not overdoing those aspects of the Christmas holiday that are not helpful to us collectively. Issues of overconsumption. I was talking to somebody the other day who now they just, rather than buy gifts, they donate to nonprofits and do that on the behalf of others. I mean, all that kind of stuff that we can do, I think we should do, but not to feel, guilty or shamed that we're basically folding into our deepest religious experience this holiday, but to say, it's a great holiday. Let's just enjoy it. And at the same time, to, especially people who come from a Christian perspective, to say, what is it about these stories that were written about the birth of Jesus that are really challenging us to think about how to be partners in the transformation of the time and place in which we live. That's exactly what Matthew was doing. It's exactly what Luke was doing. It's exactly what Mark was doing. It's exactly what John was doing. They weren't trying to just tell an old story. They were trying to live into their times meaningfully, driven by what they saw was a new path that was inclusive and accepting and gracious and compassionate for so many. how do we live into that today is really what I think is one of the great opportunities for being human in our time. So give that some thought as you think about the Christmas holidays. So to finish off today, I want to do a couple of things. One is I'm going to try something a little bit different, and that is to fold in Martin's music into our time together and to see how that goes. And so if you'll just hang tight, I'm going to invite Martin to share a little piece of music with you. And as you listen to this music today, um, it's a piece of music that attempts over the course of its short arc, I think it's 22 bars of music, Martin said, a theme over and over and over again. And as Martin implies in the introduction, one of the fun things to do is to try to listen as closely as you can to the music to say, can I hear that theme as it manifests itself in this short piece over and over again in different ways? And in many ways, I think it's a metaphor for exactly what we're talking about. How can I pay attention to the story of a coming Savior, this arrival of a newborn in a manger, and the story that holds so much transformative power in our collective life? And can I hear that story repeated over and over again throughout the arc of my own life story or our collective life story? How do I listen to that story and pay attention to it as it's folded into our collective experience? So today, as we pause and listen to a little bit of music before our announcement time, try to reflect on that today as we let Martin guide us in some music for today.
Andreas Nikolaus Vetter was born 19 years before Johann Sebastian Bach, and they composed in similar styles. Now, Vetter took a 15th century tune to which words had been set by Martin Luther in the 16th century and made it into a fugue. Now, some of you know that a fugue is a piece of music that takes a theme and repeats it throughout the piece of music on different pitch levels and in different musical contexts. In this case, the theme was the Advent hymn, Savior of the Nations Come, which we sing during the season of Advent as we prepare for Christmas. Now, the theme for this fugue is the first two opening bars of Savior of the Nations Come, and they sound like this. Now, the amazing thing about this piece of music is that this fugue is only 22 bars long, and yet you hear that theme no fewer than 8 times within those 22 bars. So here's a game that music students like to play. See if you can hear all 8 iterations of that fugue theme in these 22 bars of Savior of the Nations Come, the fugue by Andreas Nikolaus Vetter. Did you count 8 times? It's tricky. There are a couple of them that overlap. I'll see you next week.
All right, just a couple of announcements today. Hopefully you enjoyed the interview with Lee. What a lovely character. I think he brought a lot to the way in which we think about our Christmas season. A reminder that we have a big community event coming up on the 24th at 3:45 in the parking lot. So it's a drive-in community event. We will think about the birth story and what it might mean for us, sing some carols as well. It'll be a mashup of the two worlds coming together and see what we can do with those. So come for that, 3:45 on Christmas Eve, the 24th. In addition, we'll put together a service for the 24th. I'll probably just record it at some point early in the day. And then if you want to integrate a Christmas service in your Christmas experience at home, you'll have access to that via the Facebook feed or YouTube. So we'll make sure and try to get it up to YouTube as quickly as possible. And that way, if you want to pause and like hear some of the readings from the Christmas story and some of my reflections, some of Martin's music, we'll try to put that all together for you for Christmas Eve. So you can use it anytime you'd like during your own celebration at home. Also next Sunday, very excited. So you met Lee Van Ham, and next Sunday you're going to meet Lauren Van Ham. And next Sunday, Lauren is going to talk about how we think about spirituality and the natural world in this time of year as she reflects on the role of the solstice, the winter solstice, and how that's folded into the spirit of this season. So next Sunday, we'll have a lovely interview with Lauren. And then as well, I have interviewed a number of people that have worked alongside of us to put on our winter solstice events, our community events. And because we can't have that live, that podcast will be available on Soul Forum on the 18th. So it's a way for you to celebrate solstice and fold that into this season as well. So if you think about it, there's all sorts of things that you can fold into the spirit of this season. The beauty of Christmas time, right? And all that has meant to us. Acknowledging that it does reinforce a particular worldview, understanding that. The birth narratives of Jesus, so hanging on to that, and what's happening in the natural world as well. All of those coalescing in the here and now experience we are having. What resource, what depth to bring to this experience of the holidays. It's just all such lovely stuff. So we hope it's meaningful for you. Thanks for being a part of today. For those of you who will join us, I'm heading out in the rain to experience the drive-in worship down at church. And in that experience, I'm going to talk a little bit about the arrival of John the Baptist and how John the Baptist plays with two themes that have been so dominant throughout the story of the Hebrew people, and that is water and wilderness, how they keep showing up and what they invite us to as we think about our own spiritual journey. Okay, with that, have a blessed Sunday. Enjoy the gift of the day as you saw me fall into the spirit of Christmas. My blessings to you and your loved ones and to all of us who try to navigate these times together. Take care.